There have been countless failures in gaming history, and while some deserved it, what if some were actually the most important games ever made? Today I want to talk about some revolutionary games that walked so some of the biggest hits could run. These games were built on ideas that were radical, so radical that the technology of their time couldn't handle their ambition. And because of that, these games were met with confusion, frustration, and commercial failure. But now, decades later, their genius has been vindicated. These games planted seeds that would blossom into the mechanics, genres, and ideas that define modern gaming. So join me as we look through some games that were just too far ahead of their time, look through the innovations that made them fail, and find out how they shaped the future of everything we play. At number 5, we have System Shock. Now picture this. It's 1994. The first-person shooter genre is dominated by games like Doom, games that are fast-paced, non-stop action and all about reflexes. And then, Looking Glass Studios releases System Shock. Instead of playing through a power fantasy, you're a lone, vulnerable hacker trapped on a desolate space station. There are no clear objectives or friendly faces, just a bunch of corridors, cryptic audio logs, and a malevolent AI named Shodan who's constantly taunting you. For most players, it didn't click. The interface was too complex and you could lean, crouch, and go prone, which was just unheard of back in the day. The gameplay went beyond just fast-paced shooting, focusing on exploration, hacking, and piecing together a story. It was slower paced, atmospheric, and required patience. In an era defined by Doom, it turned out to be a commercial disappointment. Its sequel, even more so, only selling around 58,000 copies, failing to make its money back. The market, unfortunately, wasn't ready for a shooter that made you think more than you shoot. But System Shock was the birth of a whole new genre, the immersive sim. It was one of the first games to build a believable, truly 3D space and then ask the player to live in it. Doom's levels were mostly flat mazes, while System Shock introduced verticality and complex, multi-layered environments that felt like real places. It presented a simulated world. But its biggest innovation was the storytelling. Looking Glass deliberately removed all living NPCs, feeling they broke immersion. Instead, they scattered audio logs and emails all over Citadel Station, inventing the environmental storytelling we know today. They didn't want to just hand over the story to you, they wanted it to be a mystery that you have to solve by exploring the world and listening to the crew's final, haunting moments. The game went against the complete opposite philosophy of the time, trusting you to be smart, which created a sense of isolation and atmosphere that was unlike anything else. The failure of System Shock and its sequel tragically led to the closure of Looking Glass Studios, but its DNA is everywhere. The lead designer, Ken Levine, went on to form Irrational Games and created its spiritual successor, a game you might have heard of called BioShock. BioShock took the core ideas of System Shock, such as atmospheric storytelling, a rogue AI, and a mix of FPS and RPG mechanics, and polished them for a whole new generation. The audio diaries, the moral choices, the feeling of exploring a fallen utopia, it's all System Shock. And from there, the influence just webs out. The Deus Ex series, Prey, and Dishonored are all part of the immersive sim genre that owes its life to the groundwork laid on Citadel Station. And it showed developers that a first-person game could tell a deep story and build a deep world. At number 4, we have Elite. In 1984, the popular BBC microcomputer had just 32 kilobytes of RAM. To put things into perspective, a single screenshot today can be several megabytes. The idea of creating a massive open universe on a machine like that was almost impossible. Games tended to be small, contained experiences where your entire world was limited to what you could fit in that tiny bit of memory. But when David Braben and Ian Bell created Elite, they broke down that wall. They gave players a game with not one, but 8 galaxies containing thousands of unique planetary systems to explore. Each system had its own name, economy, and government. It was an open-ended space trading and combat sim that lets you go anywhere and do anything, at a scale that was unheard of at the time. And while it wasn't a failure, its core technology was so far beyond its time that it would take decades for the industry to truly understand what it made possible. Since they couldn't store data for thousands of star systems and 32 kilobytes, Braben and Bell designed a system to create the universe on the fly. The entire game world was generated from just a few starting numbers, also known as a seed. Using math, the game could take that seed and consistently generate the exact same universe for every single player. When you jump to a new system, it literally created it based on algorithms. It figured out the system's location, politics, and economy all from that initial seed. This is how Elite squeezed the universe into a file smaller than a modern email. And this amazing idea was born from extreme limitations. Not only is Elite one of the first games to use wireframe 3D graphics, but it actually holds the Guinness World Record for being the first video game to feature a 3D procedurally generated world. And immediately there was a wave of space sims trying to capture its magic. But that wasn't the true long-term legacy that it left behind. Its true impact was proving that procedural generation could create enormous, endless game worlds. And for decades the technique remained niche, and it was mostly used in dungeon crawlers like the Diablo series to randomize maps. Then came Minecraft, a game that gives players a basically infinite world to explore, all procedurally generated and a direct descendant of the principles pioneered in Elite. And it doesn't stop there. Think of No Man's Sky, a game that uses procedural generation to create a universe with quintillions of planets. The tech that lets you fly from space to the surface of a planet seamlessly is the modern evolution of the code that crammed 8 galaxies into a tiny file back in 1984. Now at number 3, I bet this is a game you haven't heard of because honestly, it was a game I haven't even heard of. And that's Jurassic Park Trespasser. In 1998, DreamWorks Interactive released Jurassic Park Trespasser. It was supposed to be a blockbuster sequel to the film The Lost World, with a huge budget and input from Steven Spielberg. Despite all of this, it became a huge failure, selling only about 50,000 copies and getting labeled the worst game of 1998 by outlets like GameSpot. The issue was that Trespasser was insanely ambitious. And because of this, it was rushed, buggy, and required a high-end PC almost no one owned at the time. And even beyond that, its bizarre control scheme was probably its biggest downfall. You controlled the protagonist Anne's arm with the mouse, a wobbly, independent limb you had to use for everything. It felt like you were battling the game's physics by doing something simple like picking up a box or aiming a gun. There was no crosshair, and to see her health, you had to look down at a heart tattoo on Anne's chest. Under all that jank, Trespasser is widely seen as the first game built around a complete real-time physics engine. Every object in the world, from a crate to a dinosaur, was a physical object with its own mass. It introduced a new kind of puzzle solving, where you could stack boxes to climb over walls. This was also the first game to ever use ragdoll physics. When you took down a dinosaur, there was no planned animation, its body would just tumble realistically. The developers aimed to create unexpected gameplay, where things could just happen because of how the world's systems interacted. In an interview, Valve's Gabe Newell even cited Trespasser as a direct inspiration, the game that made them see the incredible potential of using physics in gameplay. And 6 years after Trespasser's failure, Valve released Half-Life 2. The real star of that game was the physics engine. The gravity gun, which let you pick up and throw objects, was polished, perfected, and a genuinely fun version of the idea Trespasser had fumbled with. The physics puzzles and the combat were the legacy of Trespasser fully realized. It went on to create more awkward, physics-based indie games like Octodad and Surgeon Simulator. And the widespread use of ragdoll physics from GTA to countless modern shooters can be traced right back to Trespasser. At number 2, we have Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. At the time, the hype for Metal Gear Solid 2 was off the charts. The first game was a system-selling masterpiece, and the sequel's demo promised mind-blowing graphics and smart AI. And then the game came out, and after a short intro as Snake, you were just forced to play as a new guy, Raiden, a rookie with a whiny personality. Fans were furious. This isn't what they were promised, but the bait and switch was just the beginning. The story got weirder, spiraling into a meta-narrative about misinformation, memes, and the nature of reality itself. The last few hours of the game are just a blur of fourth wall breaks and philosophical lectures that just left people confused, cheated, and unsatisfied. But Metal Gear Solid 2 was kind of prophetic in a way. Releasing in November 2001, just 2 months after the 9/11 attacks, the themes in the game were ahead of their time by a mile. The game's villains, a secret AI called the Patriots, argue that in an age of infinite information, which they call junk data, context is lost and people just retreat into their own biased echo chambers. Their solution is to create and control context, censoring information not to oppress, but to shape reality and guide humanity. This was a game from 2001 that was explicitly about fake news, online echo chambers, and how having too much information can actually make us dumber. As you play the game, you'll learn the entire thing is a simulation designed to perfectly recreate the events of the first Metal Gear Solid, with you, as Raiden, being manipulated by the AI. And for years, Metal Gear Solid 2 was the black sheep of the series. Its story was dismissed as pretentious. But as time went on, reality started to look a lot like its fiction. The rise of social media, the spread of misinformation, debates about algorithmic control, and suddenly the game's confusing themes were a little too accurate. What was deemed as bizarre in 2001 kinda now feels like a direct commentary on our modern lives. Today, Metal Gear Solid 2 is one of the most artistically important video games made. Its ambition paved the way for other games to tackle complex philosophical ideas. Games that break the fourth wall, from the Stanley Parable to Undertale, owe a huge debt to Metal Gear Solid 2's courage to deconstruct the relationship between the player and the game. And at number 1, we have Shenmue. If you know about Shenmue or have played it at all, you probably could have guessed this was going to be number 1. By the late 90s, Grand Theft Auto defined open world games. Then, in 1999, Sega released Shenmue for the Dreamcast. At the time, it was the most expensive video game ever made, a masterpiece of world building that players just didn't get. The game's design was about patience and exploration. You played as Ryo Hazuki, a teenager solving his father's murder. This meant talking to people, hunting for clues, and waiting. You'd have to wait for a specific time for a shop to open or for a character to show up. The game introduced QuickTime events, a mechanic that felt jarring to players used to having full control. Its deliberate, slow pace was a huge shift from the instant gratification common in games at the time. And it was an absolute disaster. Its massive budget was impossible to earn back on a struggling console. But Shenmue basically pioneered the living open world. Long before games like Red Dead Redemption 2, Shenmue created a world where hundreds of characters had their own daily schedules. They'd wake up, go to work, eat lunch, and go home, and you could literally watch their routines play out. The game had a dynamic weather system that could replicate the actual historical weather from that time and place. You could go into almost every building, open random drawers, and interact with objects, even if they had nothing to do with the plot. And its technical innovations were just as wild. It had one of the most advanced character lip syncing systems ever made, where a tool analyzed voice acting and matched the character's mouth movements to specific vowel sounds. This level of detail was quite literally unheard of and set a new standard for realism in games. Now you can determine if Shenmue really failed based on what you determine what failure is. While it was a financial disaster, the game itself became a cult classic, and its design philosophy became the foundation for modern open world games. The idea of a world filled with NPCs living their own lives became a central theme for franchises like The Elder Scrolls and Grand Theft Auto. The obsessive attention to detail became the norm. You can go on YouTube right now and find a video about 100 small details in Red Dead Redemption 2 or other modern games. And the QuickTime event, for better or worse, became a staple of action games for over a decade, used in everything from God of War to Resident Evil 4. The advanced lip syncing it pioneered became standard across the industry. So while it was a financial disaster for Sega, it went on to show that an open world could be more than just a sandbox for chaos. These were just a few of the games that were ahead of their time and shaped the games we all play today. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe for more. I'll be making videos like this and more in the future.